The email wasn't addressed to me. That was the first thing that told me everything was already wrong. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, buried between invoices and calendar alerts, forwarded accidentally by an assistant who panicked and recalled it 3 seconds too late. By the time the recall notice popped up, I had already read the subject line. Trust restructuring. Before December. My name wasn't anywhere on it, but my life was. I'm Claire Holden. I was 32 years old when I learned, by accident, that my parents were quietly rewriting my future without me in the room. At the time, I was sitting at my desk in our family's real estate office in Marin County, the same office I'd worked in since I was 24, the same place everyone liked to call the heart of the business. What they really meant was the engine. I handled acquisitions, risk assessments, compliance. I knew which properties were bleeding money and which ones were being kept afloat by nothing but pride. I was the one who sat in meetings with city inspectors, who smoothed over zoning issues, who made sure lawsuits never reached the front door. And yet, reading that email, I realized something unsettling. I had never been invited into the structure that mattered. The email chain included my father, Martin Holden, my mother, Elise, our longtime attorney, Gerald Roth, and my younger sister, Natalie. Natalie had joined the business 3 years earlier. She was charming, visionary, my parents liked to say. She talked about branding and lifestyle aesthetics. She hated spreadsheets. The email outlined a plan to consolidate assets into a new trust, one that would ensure long-term stability and clear succession. Succession, I scrolled. The beneficiary list was discussed in careful language. Natalie's name appeared multiple times. So did my parents. Mine did not. At first, I assumed there was more. Another page, another attachment. There wasn't. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. I didn't feel angry yet. Anger takes time. What I felt was something colder, a recalibration. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. The assistant, Mia, appeared at my door 10 minutes later, pale and shaking. "I'm so sorry," she said. "That was meant for Natalie. I didn't realize." "It's fine," I said, closing my laptop. "You didn't do anything wrong." And that was true. She hadn't. At lunch, I watched my parents through the glass wall of the conference room. They were laughing with a broker. My father gestured expansively, the way he did when he felt in control. My mother nodded, serene, hands folded. They looked peaceful. People always do when they believe they're unobserved. That afternoon, I didn't confront them. I finished my work, returned calls, signed off on permits, approved a purchase that would add another 7-figure property to the portfolio. I went home at 6 like I always did. That night, I opened a notebook I hadn't touched in years and wrote one sentence. If I am this essential and still this invisible, it's not an accident. The next morning, my sister stopped by my office. Natalie perched on the edge of my desk, smiling too brightly. "Hey," she said. "Mom and Dad mentioned we might restructure things soon. Nothing final." I looked at her. Really looked. She didn't know I'd seen the email. Or maybe she did, and this was her way of managing the fallout before it began. "That's interesting," I said. "What kind of restructuring?" She shrugged. "Just planning. You know how they are." I nodded. "I do." She hesitated, then added, "You're so good at the day-to-day stuff, Claire. They just assume you'll always be here." Always be here. Not always own. Not always decide. Just always be available. After she left, I closed my office door and sat very still. I thought about my childhood, how I'd been the responsible one, the one who remembered birthdays, who helped my parents navigate crises, who never rebelled because stability felt like love. I thought about every Thanksgiving dinner where business talk ended when I entered the room. Every time my opinions were summarized by someone else. Every decision made for my own good. And something shifted. That afternoon, I made a phone call, not to my parents, to a lawyer I'd met years earlier during a zoning dispute. Her name was Rachel Wynn. Sharp, discreet, unimpressed by family narratives. "Rachel," I said when she answered, "I need to understand my position in a business I helped build." She didn't ask for details over the phone. She just said, "Come in tomorrow." That night, my mother called. "Dinner on Sunday," she said. Family only. I agreed. Not because I wanted reassurance, but because I wanted to see how far they'd go pretending nothing was wrong. As I hung up, I realized something else. This wasn't about money. It was about authorship, about who gets to decide the shape of a life. After decades of contribution, they thought I wouldn't notice. They were wrong. And they had no idea what I was about to do with the information they never meant to give me. Sunday dinner had always been my mother's domain. Elise Holden believed meals were a form of diplomacy. Food softened tension. Candles reframed conflict. If everyone was chewing, no one was arguing. That had been her strategy for decades, and most of the time, it worked. That night, the table was set like a photograph meant to reassure. White linen, roasted chicken, rosemary potatoes, Natalie's favorite salad, placed deliberately closer to her seat. My seat was the same as always, to my father's right, close enough to pass dishes, close enough to listen, never close enough to lead. We said grace. My father cleared his throat. "Busy week," he said, looking at Natalie. "The San Rafael property finally closed." "That's great," Natalie replied. "I told you the timing was right." I watched the exchange carefully. No one mentioned that I'd handled the compliance issues. No one mentioned the zoning appeal I'd spent 6 weeks untangling. That omission wasn't new. What was new was how clearly I could see it. "So," my mother said, smiling in my direction, "how are things at the office, Claire?" "Things." I cut my chicken. "The same," I said. "We're preparing for year-end audits." My father nodded absently. Good. You're always so reliable." Reliable. That word again. Natalie leaned back in her chair. "Dad and I were talking about the future," she said. "Long-term vision." My mother shot her a look. Subtle. Warning. Natalie ignored it. "We want to make sure everything's streamlined," she continued, "so nothing gets complicated later." I met her eyes. "Complicated for whom?" I asked. The table went quiet for half a second too long. My father laughed. "You know what she means. Just planning ahead." "Planning ahead." I nodded slowly. "Planning usually involves everyone affected." My mother reached for her wine. "Claire, you worry too much. You've always had a tendency to overthink." That landed exactly where it was meant to. Deflection, dressed as concern. I smiled politely. "I like clarity." "Well," my father said, voice firm, "trust us. We know what we're doing. Trust us." I looked at him. At the man who'd taught me to read balance sheets before I was 16. Who'd leaned on me during the recession. Who'd once said, without irony, that the business would collapse without me. And yet, he didn't think I deserved to know how it would outlive him. The rest of the meal passed in small talk. Natalie discussed a potential rebrand. My mother talked about a charity gala. My father complained about property taxes. No one mentioned trusts, or succession, or the future I was apparently not part of. After dessert, as my parents cleared plates, Natalie followed me into the kitchen. She lowered her voice. "You seemed tense." "I'm fine," I said. "You know Mom and Dad," she continued. "They don't like confrontation." "That's interesting," I said, "because silence is a choice too." She frowned. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything," I replied calmly. "I'm observing." She crossed her arms. "You've always taken things personally." I met her gaze. "And you've always benefited from that." Her face hardened. "You're being unfair." "Am I?" I asked. "Or am I just finally asking questions?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. "Look," she said finally, "you're indispensable where you are. That counts. Indispensable, not irreplaceable, not entitled. Useful." I dried my hands and turned to her. "Indispensable people are rarely protected." She scoffed. "You're reading too much into this." Maybe. But reading had always been my strength. As I drove home that night, the pieces clicked into place. They weren't excluding me out of malice. They were doing it out of habit. They'd built a system where my role was execution, not ownership. Stability, not power. Loyalty, not authorship. And systems don't change unless forced. The next morning, I walked into Rachel Nguyen's office with a folder full of documents I'd quietly copied over the years. Operating agreements, emails, memos, proof of contribution. She skimmed them, expression unreadable. After an hour, she looked up. "They've been careful," she said, "but not careful enough." I leaned forward. What does that mean? It means, she said, you have leverage. You just haven't used it. I felt my pulse steady. For the first time since seeing that email, I wasn't reacting, I was preparing. Rachel closed the folder. Before we talk strategy, she said, I need to ask you something. What? Are you ready to lose the version of your family that only exists if you stay quiet? I didn't answer right away. I thought about Sunday dinners, about being reliable, about being invisible. Then I said, I already have. Rachel nodded. Good. Then we can begin. As I left her office, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. Did you leave your scarf here? I stared at it for a moment, then put my phone away. Some things weren't worth retrieving anymore. Rachel didn't rush me. That was the first thing I noticed. Most attorneys I'd dealt with over the years moved fast, spoke fast, treated urgency like intelligence. Rachel did the opposite. She read slowly, asked precise questions. Let silence do the work. We sat across from each other in her office, sunlight cutting across the table, the folder of documents between us like a quiet accusation. Tell me how the business started, she said. I took a breath. My parents founded Holding Coastal Properties 26 years ago. Small at first, residential rentals. When I joined full-time, they had 12 properties. When I became head of operations, we expanded into mixed-use developments. That's when things accelerated. She nodded. And your title? Operations Director, I said, unofficially. On paper, I'm a senior manager. She raised an eyebrow. For how long? 8 years. She made a note. And ownership? None, I said. No shares, no equity. She didn't react. Instead, she slid one of the documents toward herself. An email chain from 6 years earlier. My father asking me to handle a liability issue quietly. My response outlining a solution that saved the company from a lawsuit. Did you receive compensation for this? She asked. My salary, I said. No bonus. No acknowledgement. And this? She tapped another page. A memo outlining a restructuring plan I'd drafted. One that Natalie later presented as her own. That became policy, I said. Company-wide. Rachel leaned back in her chair. Claire, she said, you weren't an employee. You were a shield. I felt something tighten in my chest. She continued. Your parents structured the business so they retain control, while relying on your labor to mitigate risk. That's not illegal by itself, but it creates vulnerabilities. Like what? I asked. Like reliance, she said, and implied authority. She explained it carefully. How repeated decision-making, documented responsibility, and reliance could establish a pattern. How that pattern could be used to challenge certain actions taken without my consent. They can't just pretend you don't exist, she said. Not when the paper trail says otherwise. I thought about the email I wasn't meant to see. The trust restructuring. The quiet exclusion. What can I do? I asked. Rachel folded her hands. You have options. None of them are loud. All of them are consequential. She laid them out one by one. A formal demand for disclosure. A challenge to the restructuring based on fiduciary duty. A strategic withdrawal paired with a notice that would freeze certain operational approvals. You don't need to accuse, she said. You just need to stop consenting. That word again. Consent. I'd given it without realizing. Every late night, every silent acceptance, every time I smoothed over a decision I didn't agree with because it felt easier than confrontation. Rachel slid a final document across the table. A draft letter. Polite, professional, dangerous. This, she said, requests transparency. Nothing more. I read it slowly. It asked for access to trust documents, succession plans, and clarification of my role moving forward. It cited my contributions, my responsibilities, my reliance. It didn't threaten. It didn't beg. It simply refused to remain uninformed. If you send this, Rachel said, you change the dynamic. I looked up. How? They'll have to decide whether to acknowledge you, she said, or explain why they won't. I sat back, considering. What happens if they ignore it? I asked. She smiled slightly. Then they confirm everything you already suspect. I left her office with the letter saved, but unsent. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was anxious, because I was recalculating. I replayed moments from the past with new clarity. My mother's gentle deflections, my father's assurances, Natalie's confidence. How often my work disappeared into we, while my presence remained singular. I thought it was humility. It was erasure. The next day at the office, nothing looked different. That was the unsettling part. I answered emails, approved budgets, took a call from a city planner who thanked me for always being so responsive. Natalie breezed past my office without stopping. My father nodded at me in the hallway. Everything functioned. And that's when I understood something crucial. They assumed I would keep things running, no matter what. The system depended on that assumption. At lunch, I printed the letter. I read it one more time, then I signed it. I didn't send it yet. Instead, I made copies of everything else. Backups, redundancies, a quiet archive of my contributions. Preparation isn't aggression, it's clarity. That afternoon, my mother called. "We're thinking of updating the office roles," she said. "Just minor adjustments." I waited. "Natalie may take on more strategic oversight," she continued. "You'll still handle operations, of course." Of course. "And how does that affect my authority?" I asked. There was a pause. Authority? "Yes," I said. "Decision-making. Accountability." "Well," she said carefully, "we don't want to complicate things." I smiled to myself. Complication was already here. "I'll need that clarified in writing," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "We'll discuss it," she said. "Later." After the call ended, I didn't feel angry. I felt resolved. That evening, I sent the letter. Not with drama, not with commentary, just attached. Addressed to my parents and Gerald Roth. When I hit send, I didn't feel like I was starting a fight. I felt like I was stepping out of a fog. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Natalie. I let it ring. Whatever came next, I wanted it documented. The silence stretched. Then the voicemail. "Claire," she said, voice tight. "Why are you doing this?" I didn't answer, because the question itself told me everything. They didn't want to know why. They wanted me to stop, and I wasn't going to. The response didn't come in writing. That should have told me everything. Instead of an email from Gerald Roth or a scheduled meeting with my parents, I got a calendar update from Natalie's assistant the next morning. Operations review. Leadership only. My name wasn't on the invite. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then checked the conference room booking. Same room where I'd led weekly reviews for nearly a decade. Same time. Same agenda template I'd created years ago. Leadership only. That was new. I didn't walk into the room anyway. That would have turned this into a confrontation, and confrontation was still there to reign. I stayed in my office and waited to see what would happen when I didn't silently comply. At 9:07 a.m., Natalie knocked on my door. She didn't smile. "We need to talk," she said. I gestured to the chair. "Go ahead." She didn't sit. She closed the door behind her, arms crossed, posture rigid. "Why did you send that letter?" she asked. I kept my voice even. "Because I was excluded from decisions that affect my role." She scoffed. "That's not true." "It is," I said. "And it's documented." Her jaw tightened. "You're overreacting. This is how businesses evolve." "Businesses don't evolve by hiding information from people who run them," I replied. She took a step closer. "You're making things difficult." There it was. Not wrong. Not inappropriate. Difficult. "I'm asking for clarity," I said. "If that's difficult, that's worth examining." She shook her head. "Mom and Dad are upset. They feel blindsided." I almost laughed. "They've been planning this for months," I said. "I saw the emails." Her eyes flickered, just for a second. "You weren't meant to see that," she said. "I know," I replied. Silence stretched between us. Then she said it. The thing they always said when control slipped. "Maybe you need some time away." I looked at her. "Time away from what?" "From the office," she said. "From the stress." I nodded slowly. "Is this a suggestion or a decision?" She hesitated. "A recommendation." "I'll need that in writing," I said. She flushed. "You're being combative." "No," I said calmly. "I'm being precise." She left without another word. 10 minutes later, my access to the financial dashboard was revoked. No announcement, no explanation, just gone. I noticed when a report failed to load, then another. I sat back in my chair, heart steady. That was the first thing they took away. Not my job, not my salary, my visibility. They assumed I'd panic. They were wrong. I forwarded screenshots to Rachel with a single sentence. "They've restricted access without notice." She replied within minutes. Good. That helped. That afternoon, Gerald Roth finally emailed. Claire, we were surprised by your letter. There may have been some miscommunication. Let's meet to clear the air. Clear the air. Another phrase meant to dissolve substance. I replied with 3 words. Please respond in writing. The meeting never happened. Instead, my father called that evening. His tone was calm, almost disappointed, like I'd broken an unspoken rule. Why are you doing this? He asked. I'm asking to be informed, I said. You've always trusted us, he replied. That trust was based on honesty, I said. This isn't that. He sighed. You're jeopardizing the company. I didn't raise my voice. No. I'm revealing how it's structured. A pause. Then, colder. You don't own this business. I know. He hung up without saying goodbye. The next few days unfolded quietly. But the message was clear. Meetings I'd once led happened without me. Decisions were made and communicated after the fact. Natalie began sending directives through intermediaries, never directly. They were shrinking my role without acknowledging it, not firing me, sidelining me. It was a classic move. One I'd seen landlords use to force tenants out without eviction. Create enough friction that leaving feels voluntary. I didn't leave. I documented every removed permission, every reassigned responsibility, every inconsistency between my role description and reality. Rachel called me on Friday afternoon. They're trying to provoke a resignation, she said. I won't give them one, I replied. Good, she said. Because the moment they materially change your role without agreement, they create exposure. Exposure. That word felt solid. That weekend, my mother came by my apartment unannounced. She stood in the doorway, eyes soft, voice low. You're hurting your father, she said. I stepped aside to let her in, but she didn't move. This isn't about him, I replied. It is, she insisted. He built this company. And I sustained it, I said. She shook her head. You're being ungrateful. I looked at her, at the woman who taught me to set the table just right, to anticipate moods, to smooth tension before it formed. I'm being accurate, I said. Her eyes filled. You don't understand what you're risking. I do, I said. I just decided it was worth it. She stared at me, searching for the daughter who would fold. She didn't find her. I hope you know what you're doing, she said finally. So do I replied. After she left, I sat on the couch and let the quiet settle. This was the part they never talked about. The moment when love is weaponized as obligation. When concern becomes leverage. They weren't angry because I'd challenged them. They were afraid because I'd stopped absorbing. On Monday morning, I walked into the office with a folder under my arm. Inside were copies of everything. I didn't know exactly how this would end yet, but I knew this. They had taken away my access. They had underestimated my preparation. And they had just crossed the line from quiet exclusion into measurable harm. From here on out, every move they made would leave a mark. The first week without access was the hardest. Not because I didn't know what was happening, but because I knew exactly how fragile the system was without me in it. Emails went unanswered. Permits stalled. A contractor called twice, asking why the approvals hadn't come through. I forwarded the messages to Natalie. She didn't reply. By Wednesday, things started to slip. I could see it in small ways. A zoning document misfiled. A meeting rescheduled twice because the right person wasn't looped in. A broker stopped by my office looking confused. Are you still overseeing the Mill Valley project? He asked. I met his eyes. Not anymore. He blinked. Since when? I shrugged. You'd have to ask leadership. The word felt strange in my mouth. Leadership. At lunch, I sat alone in my office and wrote everything down. Dates, times, what I used to handle, what was now being mishandled. Not emotionally, factually. Silence, I was learning, leaves a paper trail if you let it. On Thursday afternoon, Rachel called. They've started to feel it, she said. How can you tell? I asked. Because Gerald emailed me, she replied. He's suddenly very interested in finding a collaborative path forward. I smiled faintly. Is he? Yes, she said. And he wouldn't be if everything was running smoothly. That evening, my sister finally confronted me. She didn't come to my office this time. She waited by my car in the parking lot. This has gone far enough, she said as I unlocked the door. I disagree, I replied. You're sabotaging us, she snapped. I turned to face her. I haven't touched anything. Exactly, she said. You're letting things fall apart. No, I said calmly. I'm letting you run what you claimed you were ready to lead. Her mouth opened, closed. You think this is clever, she said. But Mom and Dad won't let you win. I studied her. The tight jaw, the way she kept glancing back at the building, like someone might be watching. I'm not trying to win, I said. I'm trying to be acknowledged. She laughed bitterly. You don't get acknowledgement by threatening the family. I tilted my head. Is that what this feels like to you? She didn't answer. Instead, she said the thing that finally stripped the situation bare. You were supposed to stay, she said. You were supposed to handle the mess so the rest of us could focus on the future. There it was. Not partnership, not trust. Assignment. I never agreed to that, I said. Yes, you did, she replied. Every time you didn't say no. I let that land. She walked away without another word. That night, I drafted my response. Not to Natalie, to the company. It was a formal notice, written with Rachel's guidance, outlining the material changes to my role, the removal of access, and the resulting operational risks. It cited dates, instances, consequences. It didn't accuse, it documented. I sent it to my parents, Natalie, and Gerald Roth. Then, I waited. The reply came the next morning, not from my parents. From Gerald. Claire, I think we should all sit down and discuss expectations before this escalates unnecessarily. Unnecessarily. I forwarded the email to Rachel. She called immediately. They want to stop the record, she said. Is that good? I asked. It means they realize they're exposed, she replied. And exposure makes people careless. That afternoon, my parents called a full staff meeting. I wasn't invited, but I heard about it anyway. A junior analyst texted me afterward. Something weird happened, she wrote. They announced a leadership restructure, but didn't explain who was responsible for what. I thanked her and saved the message. That evening, my father showed up at my apartment. Not my mother this time. Him. He stood in the doorway, shoulders tense, hands in his pockets like he didn't know where to put them. We need to fix this, he said. Then tell me the truth, I replied. He stepped inside. You've always been capable, he said carefully. But this business needs vision. I nodded. And you think Natalie provides that? Yes, he said. She connects with people. She inspires. And I execute, I said. He hesitated. You stabilize. That word again. I do more than that, I said. He looked tired. You make things hard. No, I said. I make things possible. He sat on the edge of the chair, rubbing his temples. We didn't mean to hurt you, he said. That's not the same as not doing it, I replied. He looked up. What do you want? The question was genuine. For the first time, I believed he didn't know. I want transparency, I said. I want my role defined honestly. And I want a stake that reflects what I've built. He frowned. That's complicated. I smiled slightly. So was everything I fixed for you. He stood abruptly. We'll think about it. I didn't stop him when he left, because thinking was what should have happened years ago. The next morning, I received a notification from the county office. A permit had been rejected, one I would have caught. The clock was ticking now, not because I was impatient, because the system they'd built was finally being tested without the person who'd been holding it together, and they were about to learn the difference between loyalty and leverage. The permit rejection didn't explode anything. It cracked something, small enough to ignore, loud enough to be felt. The county notice arrived at 8:12 a.m. It cited an inconsistency in setback measurements, something buried deep in an addendum Natalie's team had rushed through. A fixable error, a costly one if left unresolved. Normally, I would have handled it before it ever reached this stage. That was the point. By noon, 3 people had stopped by my office asking if I'd seen the notice. I told each of them the same thing. Yes, leadership has it. The way they paused afterward told me they knew exactly what that meant. At 2:30 p.m., Natalie called. Her voice was tight, controlled. Did you know about the permit issue? Yes, I said. And you didn't flag it? I no longer have approval authority, I replied. Or access. Silence. Then, sharper. You could have said something. I did, I said. In writing. Multiple times. She exhaled sharply. This is not the time to prove a point. I'm not proving anything, I replied. I'm respecting the structure you put in place. She hung up. At 3:15, Gerald Roth emailed again. this time with urgency. "We need to resolve this quickly. Can you assist in communicating with the county?" I forwarded the email to Rachel. Her reply came back within minutes. "Do nothing without formal reinstatement or written authority." I closed my inbox. This was the line. Not the dramatic kind. The quiet one you only notice once you're already on the other side. The office buzzed for the rest of the afternoon. Natalie paced. My father shut his door. Phones rang unanswered. A broker raised his voice in the hallway. I stayed at my desk and worked on something else. At 5 o'clock, my mother appeared. She didn't knock. She stepped inside, eyes scanning the room, like she expected to see something broken. "Why are you letting this happen?" she asked. I didn't look up right away. I finished the sentence I was typing. Then I met her gaze. "I'm not letting anything happen," I said. "I'm not intervening." She shook her head. "This is hurting everyone." "This is revealing everything," I replied. Her voice cracked. "We raised you better than this." That sentence had worked on me once. Not today. "You raised me to be responsible," I said. "I'm finally being responsible for myself." She stared at me, disbelief flickering into something closer to fear. "You're punishing us," she said. "No," I said quietly. "I'm stepping back from unpaid liability." She opened her mouth to respond, then stopped, because for the first time, she didn't have a counter. She left without another word. The permit issue was resolved 2 days later, not by me, by a consultant Gerald hired at 3 times my salary. He missed 2 details I would have caught. The fix cost the company 6 figures. No one mentioned my name in the aftermath, but everyone felt the absence. That weekend, Rachel and I met again. "They're bleeding slowly," she said, "which is the worst kind." "I don't want them destroyed," I said. "I know," she replied. "You want them honest." She slid a new document across the table, a proposal. It outlined formal recognition of my role, equity options, decision-making authority, and protection against unilateral restructuring. It also included a contingency clause. If rejected, I would formally withdraw from operational responsibility, effective immediately. Not resign. Withdraw. "Once this is sent," Rachel said, "there's no pretending anymore." I read the document carefully. It wasn't aggressive. It was final. "What if they refuse?" I asked. "Then you stop holding them together," she said. "Completely." That night, I thought about the first time I'd covered for my father in a meeting. How young I'd been. How proud he'd looked afterward. I thought about how often pride had replaced protection. On Monday morning, I sent the proposal. By noon, the office felt different, quieter, edgier. At 12:47, my father called. "Come to the conference room," he said. "Now." I stood up slowly. This wasn't a confrontation. This was a reckoning. When I entered the room, everyone was there. My parents, Natalie, Gerald Roth. The proposal lay printed on the table, pages marked, corners folded. My father didn't ask me to sit. He said, "Do you realize what you're asking for?" "Yes," I replied. Natalie scoffed. "You're holding the company hostage." I met her eyes. "I'm removing myself from a role you've already stripped." Gerald cleared his throat. "Claire, this is highly unusual." "So is restructuring a trust without informing your primary operator?" I replied. Silence. My mother spoke softly. "Why now?" I didn't raise my voice. "Because this is the first time I stopped catching you before you fell." My father looked at the document again. "If we say no," he asked, "what happened?" I answered calmly. "Then I step away," I said, "and you run the business you designed. No threat, just reality." The room stayed quiet, not because they were angry, because for the first time, they understood the cost of silence, and they were deciding whether they were willing to pay it. No one spoke for a long time. That silence wasn't confusion. It was calculation. My father read the proposal again, slower this time. Gerald Roth adjusted his glasses and avoided eye contact. Natalie stared at the table like she could will the words to rearrange themselves. My mother broke first. "You're forcing us," she said quietly. I shook my head. "I'm choosing myself." Natalie laughed, sharp and humorless. "This is unbelievable. You think you can just rewrite the rules because you feel overlooked?" I turned to her. "You rewrote them without me. I'm just responding." She stood up. "Dad, you can't agree to this." My father raised a hand, still reading. "Claire," he said finally, "this level of equity, it's not realistic." I nodded once. then neither is my continued involvement. That landed harder than anything else I'd said. Gerald cleared his throat. If Claire withdraws operational oversight, several projects will be exposed to immediate risk. Natalie shot him a look. Whose side are you on? The company's, he replied flatly. That was the moment Natalie realized this wasn't a family disagreement. It was structural. My father leaned back, rubbing his jaw. You've always been good at what you do, he said. But this feels like leverage. It is, I said calmly, because responsibility without authority is liability. My mother looked at me like she didn't recognize my face. When did you become like this? She asked. I answered honestly. When I realized love shouldn't require self-erasure, the room went still again. Natalie stood abruptly. If you walk away, don't expect to come back. I met her gaze. I'm not asking to come back. That unsettled her more than anger would have. My father closed the folder. We need time, he said. You have until Friday, I replied. After that, I withdraw. He flinched slightly at the certainty in my voice. The meeting ended without resolution, but something had shifted. That afternoon, I began preparing my exit. Not emotionally, practically. I organized my files, transferred personal items, documented handoffs I'd never officially made. I didn't announce anything. I just stopped being central. By Wednesday, cracks spread faster. A lender requested clarification on an underwriting assumption. Natalie forwarded it to 3 people before realizing no one could answer it cleanly. A city official called my direct line and asked why permit conditions hadn't been updated. I told him who now handled that. He paused. That's a change? Yes, I said. Effective immediately. On Thursday night, my mother called. Her voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. Your father isn't sleeping, she said. I'm not responsible for that, I replied. He feels betrayed. I considered that. So did I. She was quiet. Then, almost pleading, can't we fix this without lawyers? We could have, I said. Years ago. Friday morning arrived heavy and gray. I went into the office early, wrote my withdrawal notice, printed 3 copies, slid one into Gerald's mailbox, one onto my father's desk, one into Natalie's. At 10:42 a.m., my father called me into his office. He looked older. We've reviewed your proposal, he said. Natalie sat beside him, arms crossed, eyes burning. We can offer you a revised role, he continued. Increased compensation, formal title. I waited. But no equity, he said. And no veto power. There it was, the line they wouldn't cross. No, I said simply. Natalie slammed her hand on the desk. You're destroying this family. I looked at her calmly. You destroyed the illusion that it was equitable. My father closed his eyes. If you walk out, he said, this changes everything. Yes, I agreed. That's the point. I placed the withdrawal notice on his desk. I'm done catching you, I said, and I left. Not in tears, not in triumph, in control. That afternoon, Rachel filed the final paperwork. By Monday, my absence was official. By Wednesday, it was undeniable. The business stumbled, then lurched. Deals slowed. Consultants multiplied. Costs ballooned. In the trust restructuring, it stalled. Because the moment I stepped away, Gerald advised caution. Exposure, he called it. Weeks passed. Then, one evening, my father emailed. Subject, reconsideration. I didn't open it right away, because for the first time in my life, urgency wasn't mine to manage. I waited 2 days before opening the email, not out of spite, out of recalibration. For most of my life, urgency had been a leash. If something needed attention, I responded. If someone sounded strained, I adjusted. I'd been trained to believe speed was care. Now, I let the message sit. When I finally opened it, the tone was different. Not authoritative, not dismissive. Careful, Claire, my father wrote. After further discussion, we realize we underestimated the impact of your departure. We'd like to revisit the terms you proposed. Revisit, not accept. Not apologize. Just reconsider. I forwarded the email to Rachel without comment. She replied with a single line. They're feeling the vacuum. That week, the vacuum widened. A project in Sausalito missed a deadline. A lender delayed funding pending clarification of oversight. A municipal board requested a compliance review and flagged inconsistencies in documentation that had previously sailed through unnoticed. None of it was catastrophic. Yet. But the pattern was forming. Natalie tried to step into my role publicly, but privately, she floundered. Vision didn't replace fluency. Confidence didn't substitute for institutional memory. And every consultant they hired asked the same question. Who handled this before? The answer was always awkward. I stayed quiet, not strategically. Naturally. When you stop performing a function, people eventually notice, whether it was ever optional. On Friday afternoon, Rachel and I met again. They're going to come back with a compromise, she said. Something that looks generous, but keeps control centralized. I nodded. I won't accept it, she smiled. I know. What happens if they cave? I asked. Then you decide if you even want it anymore, she replied. That question lingered, because something unexpected had happened since I left. I was breathing differently, sleeping better, thinking more clearly. Without the constant low-level tension of being indispensable, my mind had space. I began consulting independently, quietly. Former contacts reached out. One opportunity led to another. I wasn't scrambling. I was choosing. On Monday morning, my parents requested a formal meeting. Neutral location. Their attorney present. Mine too. We met in a downtown office I'd never been to before. Neutral territory. No history embedded in the walls. My father spoke first. We're prepared to offer you equity, he said. Natalie looked like she'd swallowed something bitter. How much? I asked. 10%, he replied. I waited. With a vesting schedule, Gerald added. And no voting rights. Rachel leaned forward. That's not equity. That's deferred compensation. My father frowned. It's a step. A step toward what? I asked. Toward reconciliation, my mother said softly. There it was again. Emotion used to negotiate structure. I shook my head. This isn't about reconciliation, Natalie snapped. Then what do you want? I looked at her. Ownership, I said. In reality, not sentiment. My father sighed. You're asking us to dismantle the way we've always done things. Yes, I replied. Because the way you've always done things depends on my silence. The room went quiet. Rachel slid a document across the table. This, she said, is Claire's final position. It was shorter than the first proposal. Cleaner. Majority stake in operations. Voting rights. Defined authority. Exit protections. No ambiguity. No room for reinterpretation. My father stared at it like it was written in another language. Natalie shook her head slowly. You can't be serious. I am, I said. You take control away from us, she said. No, I replied. I'd take responsibility for what I already carried. Gerald cleared his throat. This would fundamentally alter the company. Yes, Rachel said. That's the point. My mother's voice trembled. If we agree to this, what happens to us? I answered gently. You stop managing me and start relating to me. That scared her more than losing control. The meeting ended without a signature. But something crucial had changed. They weren't negotiating from confidence anymore. They were negotiating from loss. That evening, Natalie called me directly. Her voice was raw. You don't need this, she said. You're good without it. Just walk away. I considered that. I already did, I replied. This isn't about need. It's about closure. You're doing this to punish us, she said. No, I said quietly. I'm doing this to stop punishing myself. She didn't respond. The next morning, my father emailed again. Subject, acceptance. One word, nothing else. I opened the attachment. Signed. Unconditional. They had crossed the line they thought they never would. But as I stared at the document, something surprised me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt distant. Because sometimes, when an offer comes too late, it reveals something else entirely. You no longer want what you fought for. You just needed to know you could have it. And now, I had a decision to make. Not about the company. About who I was willing to become to keep it. I didn't sign the acceptance right away. That surprised everyone, including me. The document sat on my kitchen table for 3 days, untouched. Every clause was exactly as Rachel and I had demanded. Voting rights, operational control, exit protections. It was clean, enforceable, real. This was the moment I'd been working toward. So why did it feel quiet? Not relief, not triumph, just distance. On the fourth morning, I met Rachel for coffee. "You look like someone who won a long fight and realized it changed you," she said. "I thought getting control would feel like resolution," I replied. "It doesn't," she nodded, "because the fight was never really about control." I stirred my coffee, watching the cream dissolve. "It was about consent," I said. "Exactly," she replied. "And you already reclaimed that." That afternoon, I went back to the office for the first time since the acceptance email. Not to work, to observe. The space felt different, smaller, like a stage after the lights go out. Natalie avoided my eyes. Staff members hesitated, unsure how to greet me now. My father watched from his office as I walked through the hallway, not stopping anyone, not asking questions. They were waiting. I stepped into the conference room, where so many quiet decisions had been made without me. I stood there alone for a moment, listening to the hum of the building. This room had taken years from me, and yet, standing there now, I didn't feel pulled back in. I felt finished. My mother found me near the window. "You can still make this right," she said softly. I turned to her. "What does right look like to you?" She hesitated. "Us. Together again." I shook my head gently. Together only worked when I was small. Her eyes filled. "I didn't know." "I believe you," I said. "That doesn't change what happened." She reached for my hand, then stopped herself. That was new. Respect. Later that day, Natalie finally spoke to me. "I don't understand," she said. "You got everything you wanted." I looked at her. "No, I got everything I needed to see." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "I don't want to inherit a system that requires someone else to disappear." She laughed bitterly. "So you're just going to walk away?" "Not just," I replied. "Intentionally." That evening, I sat at my kitchen table again, the document in front of me, a pen in my hand. I signed, not as a return, as a transfer. The next morning, Rachel filed a second document, one that surprised them. I accepted the terms, then immediately initiated a structured exit. Transition period. Defined responsibilities. Buyout clause triggered within 12 months. Ownership, then release. Control, then departure. When my father called, his voice was stunned. "You're leaving?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "But you fought so hard," he replied. "I fought to be seen," I said, "not to stay." There was nothing else to say. In the weeks that followed, the company adjusted. Slowly. Awkwardly. Without me. Natalie stepped into a role she'd wanted without fully understanding the cost. My parents receded. Consultants became permanent fixtures. And I built something else. Something smaller, cleaner. Mine. I consulted selectively, took on projects that respected boundaries, declined anything that smelled like obligation disguised as opportunity. The revenge wasn't dramatic. It wasn't public. It was structural. I didn't burn anything down. I walked away with the proof that I could have owned it all, and chose not to, because the ultimate power wasn't taking control. It was refusing to be controlled ever again. By October, the company looked different from the outside. Same name, same logo, same offices. Inside, everything had slowed. Not collapsed, slowed. Decisions took longer. Emails looped through too many people. Consultants spoke more than staff. No one quite knew who owned which problem anymore. From a distance, it looked like caution. Up close, it was confusion. I stayed out of it. My transition agreement limited my involvement to advisory calls twice a month. I showed up on time. I answered precisely. I didn't volunteer extra. When meetings ended early, I didn't fill the silence. They learned quickly how much space I'd used to occupy. Natalie struggled more than she admitted. She had the title now, the authority, the room. What she didn't have was fluency. In one call, a lender asked about a contingency assumption buried deep in an old acquisition. Natalie glanced off screen, searching for help that wasn't there. "I'll follow up," she said. I stayed quiet. After the call, my father emailed me privately. "Could you help her more?" I replied. "Only within the scope of our agreement." The next message didn't come. They were learning. My mother called in late November. "Your aunt asked why you won't be at Thanksgiving," she said. "I didn't say I wouldn't," I replied. "I said I'd decide." She paused. "That hurts." I considered that. "Then maybe stop equating presence with obedience," I said. She didn't respond. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it with friends, people who knew nothing about trust documents or restructuring meetings. We cooked together, laughed. No one performed gratitude. It felt honest. In December, something unexpected happened. A former employee reached out. He'd left the company 2 years earlier, after being quietly sidelined. He thanked me for how I'd treated him. I thought it was just me, he said. Now I see it wasn't. That stayed with me. Patterns always reveal themselves once someone stops absorbing them. In early January, my father requested one final meeting, just the two of us. No lawyers, no agenda. We met in a small cafe near the office. Neutral, human. He looked older. I thought you'd come back, he said. I know, I replied. I thought this was a phase. It wasn't, I said. He stirred his coffee, eyes fixed on the cup. You were never meant to leave. I nodded. That was the problem. He looked up. What do we call this now? I thought for a moment. Change, I said. Not loss. He exhaled slowly. I wish we'd done better, he said. I do too, I replied. We sat in silence. It wasn't reconciliation, but it wasn't war either. It was recognition. And recognition, without control attached, is rare. When we stood to leave, he hesitated. I'm proud of you, he said. I met his eyes. This time, I believed him. And this time, it didn't pull me backward. Because pride offered, after freedom, is just information, not obligation. January passed quietly. That, more than anything, told me I had made the right choice. There were no emergencies disguised as requests, no sudden crises that only I could solve, no late-night calls framed as concern. The space I'd created stayed intact, and in that space, something else began to form. Clarity. Without the constant pressure of holding a system together, my thoughts slowed. My days became intentional. I woke up without the familiar tightness in my chest, the anticipation of being needed before I was even seen. I hadn't realized how much of my identity had been shaped by urgency. People reached out differently now, not because they assumed I would fix things, but because they valued my perspective. The consulting work I took on was selective. I said no often. When I said yes, it was because I wanted to, not because I felt responsible. That distinction changed everything. In mid-January, Natalie emailed. Short. Unpolished. I didn't know how much you did until you stopped. I read it once. Then again. I didn't reply immediately. Not out of punishment. Out of honesty. I wasn't sure what she wanted from me now. Understanding? Forgiveness? Validation? I couldn't give her clarity she hadn't earned yet. A week later, she emailed again. I'm not asking you to come back. I just wanted you to know. I see it now. I responded with a single sentence. Seeing it is the first step. She didn't reply. That was enough. My mother called more frequently than my father. Her calls weren't manipulative anymore. They were tentative. Like she was learning a new language and didn't want to mispronounce anything. How are you? She'd ask. I answered honestly. Not overly detailed, not guarded. I'm well. She seemed surprised each time. In February, I attended a small industry conference in San Diego. Not as a representative, as myself. I spoke on a panel about operational ethics in family-run companies. I didn't mention my own experience directly. I didn't need to. Afterward, a woman in her 60s approached me. I wish I'd heard that 20 years ago, she said. I stayed because I thought leaving would destroy my family. I nodded. It doesn't destroy families, I said. It just reveals them. She squeezed my hand. Those moments mattered more than anything I'd built before. Late one evening, Rachel called. I wanted to tell you something, she said. Your case has come up more than once. In what way? I asked. As an example, she replied, of what happens when someone refuses to be managed by silence. I smiled. That phrase stayed with me. Managed by silence. That's what it had been. Not neglect. Not cruelty. Control without confrontation. I'd mistaken it for peace. By March, my transition agreement officially ended. No ceremony, no announcement, just a clean break. I didn't attend the office farewell my parents organized. Rachel advised against it. Not because it would be hostile, but because it would invite nostalgia to rewrite the truth. I sent a polite note instead. Thank you. Wishing you well. And I meant it. The company moved on. So did they. And so did I. One night, sitting alone in my apartment, I opened the notebook where I'd written that first sentence months earlier. If I am this essential and still this invisible, it's not an accident. I added another line beneath it. Invisibility is a design choice. Leaving is consent withdrawn. I closed the notebook. I didn't need it anymore. The separation hadn't made me smaller. It hadn't isolated me. It had clarified what belonged to me and what never had. And for the first time, my life felt authored, not inherited, not assigned, chosen. I didn't announce the end. There was no final meeting, no farewell email, no last walk through the office where everything began. When my transition period ended, I simply stopped showing up. The calendar invites expired, the calls ceased. The space where I used to exist closed without ceremony. That was the truest ending possible. People expect revenge to look like spectacle, exposure, collapse, public shame. They expect karma to arrive loudly, knocking things over so everyone can see it work. That isn't how it usually happens. What came instead was silence. Not the punishing kind, the clean kind. I spent the spring rebuilding my life around what felt solid. My work became focused, not sprawling. I partnered with companies that valued structure, not sacrifice. When contracts crossed boundaries, I declined them without explanation. I didn't negotiate with dynamics I recognized as toxic. I had learned the pattern too well. Occasionally, news reached me about my family's business. Always indirectly, always softened. They were adjusting. They were bringing in more support. They were rethinking strategy. What that meant was simple. They were paying for what I used to give freely. Natalie struggled publicly at first. Not because she wasn't capable, but because she'd inherited a role without the scaffolding I'd quietly built beneath it. My parents receded from daily operations. Control had exhausted them. Letting go always does when it's done too late. I didn't gloat. I didn't watch closely, because the outcome was no longer the point. One afternoon in early summer, my father called, not with urgency, not with expectation, just to talk. We spoke about ordinary things. The weather, a book he'd read, a property he no longer felt attached to. Then he said something unexpected. "You were right," he said, "about the structure." I didn't respond immediately. "You carried more than we admitted," he continued, "and we mistook your steadiness for consent." That sentence mattered, not because it fixed anything, but because it named it. "I hope you're doing well," he added. "I am," I said, and I meant it. When the call ended, I didn't feel lighter or heavier, just complete. Later that week, I attended a small gathering, hosted by a woman I'd met through consulting. Most of us were older, women who had spent decades being reliable, competent, invisible. We shared stories without drama, without competition. One woman said, "I always thought choosing myself would cost me everything." Another replied, "It only cost me what was costing me." I thought about that all the way home. The truth is, the revenge wasn't in what I took. It was in what I refused to keep giving. I didn't reclaim the company. I didn't take the spotlight. I didn't demand apologies. I reclaimed authorship. I chose boundaries over belonging, dignity over approval, clarity over comfort. That choice reshaped everything. If you're listening to this and something in it feels familiar, I want you to hear this clearly. Being needed is not the same as being valued. Being included is not the same as being respected. And being quiet does not mean you've agreed. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop explaining and start deciding. Stop catching people before they fall. Stop absorbing what was never yours to carry. Stop waiting for permission to live a life that fits. The moment you choose yourself, the system around you has to adjust or collapse. Either way, you are no longer trapped inside it. Thank you for staying with me until the end. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment. Tell me where you recognized yourself. Like the video if it helped you put words to something you've been holding quietly for years. Subscribe if you want more stories about revenge, family drama, betrayal, inheritance, and the kind of justice that doesn't shout. Some endings don't look like victory. They look like peace. And that is more than enough.